At 11:40 a.m. on November 29, 1986, a 36-year-old volunteer fire chief named Jack Schofstall parked his fire truck on a country road right next to this huge farm in rural Indiana. Jack was there with his assistant chief named Donald Schnitker, and he saw the owner of this farm, Jeffrey Wolf, was standing on the side of the road, waving to them and turning around and pointing back towards his property, and they saw there was this huge storage building off in the distance, and there appeared to be this thin plume of smoke, and the three of them jog across the property over to this building. This storage building was packed to the brim with stuff. Really, the only way to actually look inside of this building to see what was burning is by climbing up this ladder that ran to the top of this 80-foot tall building, where at the very top there was a window that looked down into the storage building. And so basically Jack and Jeff said they would climb the ladder up to the top. Donald, the assistant chief, he would stay on the ground so they could make a decision about how to approach this. And so Jack and Jeff, they make their way up this ladder to the very top. They get to this window and Jack, he looks inside, but he can't tell where it's coming from. It's just there's so much stuff inside of this building. Jeffrey clearly had placed this big piece of plywood on the very top of all the stuff inside of the storage building. And so Jack climbed through the window. And so he gets on there, and as he's looking around, he identifies where this fire is coming from. And so Jack, who's still standing on this piece of plywood, he pulls out his radio and he radios down to Donald, the assistant chief, who's down on the ground. And he says, "We located the fire. We're gonna come back down, get our equipment. We'll come back up here. We'll put this thing out." But after Jack put the radio back on his belt, before he got off the plywood, there was this low rumbling sound that came from right underneath his feet. At the same time, Donald, who's back down on the ground, he hasn't seen either of them come out of this building. And so Donald grabs his radio and begins repeatedly calling Jack, but he didn't get an answer. Donald began calling for help. And very quickly, an entire fleet of additional firefighters and police officers and ambulances showed up. First responders climbed up that ladder and they figured out what happened. So when Jack climbed through that window at the top of this building and he stood on top of that piece of plywood, that rumbling under his feet was all the stuff underneath the plywood shifting, and he sort of lost his balance, and Jack fell off the plywood into basically this sea of stuff. And Jeffrey, when he saw this happen, he had not fallen in, but he turned and basically tried to get in there and grab on to Jack to get him out, but he too inadvertently fell into what was inside of this building. And what was inside of this building was corn. This was an 80-foot tall grain silo. And so when Jack fell into the grain, it was like it swallowed him whole like quicksand. And then Jeffrey, in an attempt to save Jack, also fell in, got swallowed whole, and they disappeared and suffocated. It would ultimately take nearly 3 hours for bulldozers to basically break apart this building and sift through all the corn to finally locate Jack and Jeffrey.